From the docket of Glim Vigil, Chaplain of Central Receiving for the Order of the Cathedral. Item 6. The severed head of Saint Castellian the Obtuse, patron of egg-laying mammals, on a silk serviette in a sealed glass case. Looks as fresh as the day he was executed. I imagine the Confederation of Monotremes would love to have him for one of their incubator moons. Put him in storage. I'll send them an email once we've finished here. Item 7. Oh, no metadata for this one. I will just have to do it the old-fashioned way. This object appears to be of Ileroy manufacture. A simple art object, no arcane property is registering on any of the instrumentation, but it is fascinating. The sculpture of a starship, roughly 0.5 meters by 0.5 meters by 0.3 meters. It is not a traditional Ileroy make, very unusual design. There are 3 different materials used in the composition. Firstly, we have what I am guessing is trailing wormwood, a dark hardwood native to Rhea. The wooden sections are heavily stained and charred to give them an almost chitinous appearance. Secondly, we have common iron. You rarely see this in modern Ileroy work. It's considered a base, weak substance. This marks the piece as being easily 1,000 years old, probably much older, possibly even pre-Mikoi. This third material is the interesting part, however. The forward section of the ship is made of a bright, clear amber, which winds back and intermingles with the other sections in intricate swirls and angles. I haven't seen a specimen of this quality in quite some time. There appears to be... Hand me that light, would you? Yes. There appears to be something preserved in it. A very small insectoid creature. Culia, have this piece sent to my office. I need to give it a little more attention. It may turn out to have significant research value, and if not, I think it would make an excellent candlelight gift for my husband.
Welcome to The Chimera, a role-playing adventure podcast where a group of old college friends and campaign collaborators get back in the saddle. Our campaign is The Old Bones, a sci-fi superhero space opera that follows the adventures of a group of alien misfits aboard a mysterious and ancient starship. We are playing with a beta version of Onyx Path's StoryPath system, and this week we're doing another flashback episode. This time we're following the exploits of everyone's favorite heretical catman, Theron Melanthios, as portrayed by Kelly Wiseman-Astruth Jackson, and the rest of us are filling in the side roles. That's me, Vin LeBate, as well as Braden Lamb, Kacey Smith, and of course our GM, Josh Hall-Bachner, is running the show. Jeffrey Bard has the week off because he is registering his baby with the government or something, but he will be back with us next time. So, without further ado, take it away, Josh.
Alright, so shall I just kind of get us started then?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yes.
So, it is a cool, pleasant day, late in the summer on the distant planet of Fingerroll. Outside, the Maxon trees are blowing in the wind. Their 7-pointed turquoise leaves gently waving across the sky. At a cafe across the street, 3 Ardori of almost identical appearance are sitting over a set of a large pot of noodles, rather animatedly debating topics of rather minute and uninteresting politics. But here we are at the First Regional Bank of Fingerroll Outpost 12, a rather unassuming white building, maybe 30 feet tall, looking largely like a converted old-style home, more so than a place of proper business. Here in the lobby, where there is one wall that's been built of reinforced steel and various space-age materials with a variety of holographically locked safety deposit boxes, all available. And at the center of those, one rather large box has been apparently cut open with some sort of unknown but extremely precise and powerful device. A large circular hole was made directly in the center of it. Contents are empty, and off to one side there is a rather large fire slowly dying out, where a set of filing cabinets and other kind of paper debris had been spread out and lit in order to trigger the local alarms and sprinkler systems, which are still pouring out a fine mist of water onto the room. So here it is that we find Sheriff of Outpost 12, Theron Melanthios, in the beginnings of his investigation.
Theron has his arms crossed, sucking a small fragment of some sort of meat out of a couple of his teeth, looking perturbed. He feels as though when someone is willing to commit such a brazen act of theft in an area under his jurisdiction, it reflects on the fact that he has not been projecting a sufficiently intimidating reputation. He eyes the scene, sniffs the air, rubs with a little bit of discomfort at his right ear, because he can hear the alarm at a greater depth of frequency than most other people can, and begins to look for clues.
Okay, doke. So, as I mentioned, the hole was cut into this one safety deposit box. Otherwise, this wall appears to have been completely undisturbed. The hole itself is, as far as Theron can tell, completely circular. No evidence that either this was done by, in some automated fashion, or by somebody with a tremendous amount of, fine control over whatever tool they used for it. The inside is completely empty, and there's no obvious material traces of whatever was stored within. So presumably it was either something pretty inert or otherwise kind of boxed up, and nothing that could leave chemical traces or obvious evidence in that way.
The appearance is that the papers that were set alight are not from this box. Is that right?
Yes. Looking at that, you can kind of identify, like I said, this bank is not particularly large. This set of safety deposit boxes was kind of built up to be relatively, secure and everything, but most of the rest of it kind of has this, small town country kind of vibe going. So you can see basically where, from a set of kind of like teller desks that were, set in various parts of the lobby here, somebody had actually, dragged filing cabinets and everything. And you can see the spots in the rug where they were previously sitting. You can see a little bit of the kind of drag marks. So it's obvious that they were kind of pulled from these places, emptied out, and then set on fire.
Okay.
The rug is all kind of moist now from the ongoing mist, and the combination of the water and the smoke has made it hard to really pick out a lot in the way of other scents beyond kind of what's obvious from the still ongoing stuff. So there's nothing obvious, at least at first sniff, basically, in terms of identifying somebody who shouldn't be here or anything of that nature.
Okay.
So hovering about the scene is a featureless glass sphere that's maybe 1.5 feet, 2 feet in diameter, that is sort of suffused with a pale blue-white glow. This is Sheriff's Deputy Blue White. And she sort of hovers up to the hole. Sheriff, I can try and run some molecular scans on this if you would like.
Yes, that sounds good. Do that.
All right, initiating scanning.
Okay. Looking at, examining this from a kind of more fine-grained perspective. The main thing that's obvious quickly from looking at it is that you're looking at a hole that was cut with some form of like monofilament tool. So it's not an energy weapon or anything like that, which would lead to like a certain amount. Even a really precise one would lead to some kind of like melting or other kind of like state change on the portion that was actually cut through. But instead, it's just, sharply divided at the exact spot where it's been cut open. So, and cut at a level where it's like it's very clean and precise.
This crime was committed by Wolverine.
It appears to be a monofilament tool, sir.
Yes, it must have been someone with extremely precise muscle control. I'm reasonably sure Theron draws his blade for a moment and sort of gauges it against the hole in the box. I'm reasonably confident that I could have done it given enough time and practice, but I wouldn't attempt it at this level of precision on the first go. And I don't know anyone else on planet, he puts it back, who would do a better job of it than I would.
And why bother being so precise for this task in the first place?
Well, obviously they take pride in their work.
So at this point, the kind of front door of the bank is somewhat, rudely shoved open, and two Qualians dressed in rather uncomfortable-looking, suits that kind of are cut to make them look bigger than they are, which is kind of absurd since they're both short and skinny. The effect is kind of like, maybe like a gangly 11-year-old trying to wear like a mob enforcer uniform. But they both push this door open and stride in, holding the door. And behind them comes through a gentleman that pretty much anyone in Outpost 12 will immediately recognize as Mr. Renderex Villac IV, the single wealthiest man in Outpost 12. He's an Ardori of somewhat advanced age, rather short for his species, kind of a broad face, long kind of like dishwatery hair almost, kind of loose around his shoulders, a business suit that, like many off-world Ardoris, is kind of cut to imply a connection to the homeworld treasury, but very clearly distinct from it enough that no one would ever mistake it for treasury garb. You can kind of see the various kind of bioluminescent lights on his face, which in his case kind of take the form of this mirrored but otherwise kind of uneven pattern of splotches pulsating in red and green, and in what certainly does not come off as a very even-keeled fashion. And of course, this gentleman, it's very obvious to everyone around whenever he kind of steps in anywhere that he's somewhat more wealthy and successful than the average Ardori on this planet, just because the vast majority of the Ardori population here is all derived from a singular clone line. Almost all of them are women of a very similar appearance, so the fact that you have somebody who's so clearly from outside that means that they would really only be here, in a position of pretty significant power and authority. He strides over, and as he sees the hole in his particular security deposit box, you can see the glowing begin to pulse a little bit more quickly and shift further from green into red.
Theron observes the man enter, of course, and then observes his reaction to the situation. Comes over, stands a little too close. Just a little too close.
He kind of bends back a little bit to look up at Theron.
It says, "Hello, Renderex Jr., Jr., Jr." Now, this is an artifact of Theron's native language, because, of course, he's just speaking his native language, and it's being translated. it's a completely normal way of addressing someone who is the fourth. That they don't do numbering systems for the Aelori. They just have a special sobriquet that's added if you have the same name as a parent. It's actually quite an honor. And they just do that over and over again unto whatever iteration you have. But he has been corrected about it before, and he has not changed his method of address for Renderex.
That seems like it checks out. He kind of looks up and he just goes, Theron Melanthios. And he kind of stares at you.
Sheriff Theron Melanthios.
Sheriff Theron Melanthios. He clears his throat rather brusquely. He kind of, continues to look up at you for a second. His eyes kind of slide over. He looks back up at you. Eyes slide back over to the deposit box again. And then he collects himself a little bit and he says, what can you tell me about what has happened here so far?
There has been a theft. Also, some arson.
He looks over at the burning and kind of wrinkles his nose a little bit.
What can you tell me about this safety deposit box?
He kind of walks over to it, rummages around in one of his pockets, seeming like he's looking for something, doesn't seem to find it, snaps at one of the two Qualians who came in with him, who kind of digs through his own pockets at some extensive length until he manages to produce a little, hexagonal holographic chip, which he hands to Renderex. He puts it up against the cut open door of the safety deposit box, which causes it to unlock and kind of swing open, revealing exactly what anyone could see looking through the hole, which is that it is now empty and that there is nothing in it. He kind of looks at it and he goes, and he kind of sighs a little. This was a location where I was storing several family mementos as well as important paper records related to my family's holdings on this and other planets, and several small pieces of jewelry. He kind of was looking around inside.
My condolences on your loss. I will do my utmost to make sure your property is returned to you. Do you know of anyone that might have wished you harm or to possess one of the objects that you had in this box?
I do not think there is any way that anyone could possibly wish me harm. That seems quite unlikely. He kind of takes his hand and is kind of poking around in there, as if somehow putting his hand in the box is going to cause whatever he thinks is supposed to be there to suddenly appear, but it does not appear to be accomplishing anything. He kind of looks at it. He goes, I wouldn't imagine that... He kind of clears his throat repeatedly. I wouldn't imagine that any of the things that I kept there would be of any interest to anybody. They were primarily relevant to me and my, the Villac family line. Very little of it would have had any value to anybody else.
What about another member of the Villac clan? Any dispute in inheritance or conflict with a packmate over where your, I'm going to say, grandmother's pinky ring was kept?
He cracks a knuckle and he goes, not with anyone currently alive.
Convenient. Well, if you think of anything which you would like to share with me so that I can find the things that were stolen from you, you know how to contact me.
He kind of wipes his forehead off a little, kind of looks over at you. He looks over at Blue-White for a second, as if, hoping for some kind of, additional useful, injection into this conversation, which he does not feel like has gone as well as he would have hoped.
So Blue is not capable of any kind of expression, and she often likes to take advantage of that by remaining absolutely silent when people are looking at her for expression.
Okay, so there's, I would say, approximately 30 seconds of awkward silence, and then he turns rapidly, snaps again, walks out the door. The two Quailian attendants follow after him, closing the door, this time much more politely than on his way in, carefully, kind of lightly shutting it behind them, and then they're gone.
What do you think, Blue?
I think I should probably go through the records and pull up all of the complaints that have been filed against him over the past several years. I think there's at least a few.
That could take you some time. Josh, I might have missed it. Is it obvious how the thief gained entry to the building?
No, it's not obvious.
All right.
Not that it couldn't necessarily be... Not that there isn't necessarily any information, but it's not obvious from...
It's not obvious. Right?
Examining from where you are.
Then I am going to start the process of trying to figure out how they got in and out.
I guess what I'll say is that probably what would end up happening here then is that Theron would spend some time kind of physically examining the location. Blue would probably wind up running off to actually, kind of run the details and reporting like she just mentioned. And then you guys should probably come together at a second location to actually discuss that. So, yeah,
sounds good.
Okay.
So once we've each done our respective bits, you said there was a noodle place across the street, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, noodles it is.
Okie doke. So at the noodle shop, the table of Ardori is still continuing to argue about a rather in-depth set of very subtle distinctions regarding the kind of philosophical nature of the moat and its place within both Ardori society and the Galactic Society at a larger level. And they've gotten to the point where they've each kind of taken out little whiteboards or, kind of little digital, things that are kind of drawing with one finger each little diagrams and indicators to kind of try to establish their position. So that's kind of the background noise of what's going on in here is just these increasingly heated arguments about, monetary policy, essentially. The noodles here are, as at almost all good noodle places, greasy but relatively delicious and can have a wide variety of different life forms cooked alongside them. So convenient for many different species to eat. So
so Theron has opted for a dish that is on the menu something as a joke. Its nearest equivalent would be a sort of a pho, in that it's a broth and noodles and then some seared meat. But it's like, think about one of those big sushi boats you get when you go out on somebody's expense account at a sushi place. But that's full of noodles. And the meat being served in the broth with the noodles is Garthabeest. So he's noisily eating that and sort of getting into a one-man Lady and the Tramp routine with the bowl and the noodles, slurping away. What'd you find for me, Blue?
Blue is hovering next to a plate of plain buttered noodles that she orders to avoid irritating the staff, and that she knows that the sheriff will eat when he is done.
Are the noodles also hovering, or?
No, they're just sitting on the table.
Okay. Is Blue doing this just to be polite, but she doesn't actually need anything, or is she going to have to go get a to-go box of electricity later or something?
Oh, she gets all of her sustenance through gas exchange.
Okay. All right.
Sure.
Okay.
Like you do.
Yeah.
Checks out.
Yeah. So we have several of the standard complaints, largely in his real estate dealings. No large names cropping up. Although we do have a couple of our usual suspects listed in here as renters who have had some issues.
And that list is going to be, very much the kind of thing that you would expect from the richest guy in a random outpost town like this. Some of it is various types of ill repute that, are either, like we said, renting from him or otherwise kind of like engaging in some sort of behavior on property that he happens to own and therefore have, had a noise complaint called against them or something. There's like a local orphanage that is like constantly in danger of shutting down that he has some kind of ownership over, and the plucky orphans have to pull together a collection to keep it open, all that kind of thing. So your usual sort of heavily questionable ultra rich carpetbagger rentier jerkwad. But as a result, most of the people that he has a noted conflict with are either kind of low-level scumbags, and so therefore not likely to be the kind of people who are practicing a careful process like that was used to break in here, or people that you wouldn't tend to think of in kind of criminal activity at all, plucky orphans.
Well, unless one of these orphans has developed some rather spectacular thieving skills, I don't see any obvious leads here. Do I have a sense of how the thief got in and out of the building, Josh?
Yep. So the investigation would have been a little slower than Theron would normally like due to kind of the confounding factors of the sprinklers and the smoke and everything. Mm-hmm. But given a little time and the ability to kind of eventually shut down the systems and clear out the air, he'd be able to do a pretty decent job of kind of going over the physical evidence. The biggest thing that would be kind of noticeable early on is that, the lobby area, this is one of those buildings, it's maybe, 3 stories tall or something. And the lobby area just basically has a big vaulted ceiling. So it kind of goes up all the way to the top. And then once you kind of go into the building proper, there's kind of something that's actually divided up into spaces. So there's a set of high set windows in the lobby area that are kind of up there and cast a certain amount of the sunlight in that keeps the area kind of nice and bright and open seeming. Once Theron's able to kind of investigate, he's able to pretty clearly determine that one of these, not on the front, but kind of on the one of the 2 that are on the top level on the side of the lobby area. One of those, basically the one that faces into the woods and therefore wouldn't have had anybody in another building immediately kind of working in on it, seems like it was probably disturbed. There's no obvious physical damage or anything to it, but, on a close inspection, you can basically see that the dust that is present pretty thickly on the one on the opposite side has been somewhat disturbed on this one. So it seems like it was opened recently. That's the best piece of evidence that something specific has been disrupted here. So, and it's just one, so it seems relatively likely that the culprit left the same way that they came in.
Mm-hmm. It looks like they got in through one of the upper windows. Security at this site was insufficient.
How high is that window?
25, 30 feet up.
Blue just sort of floats up to that height. And I would say looks down, but you can't really tell which direction she's looking in. And in fact, she probably has omnidirectional vision.
Yep.
So, I don't see a lot of signs of equipment.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it.
And I can certainly get in up here, and I think you probably could, but it's not likely the purview of a lot of the local species.
If you were going to, Theron as a cat person could get through, but anybody, almost anybody else, the height of Theron couldn't. The window isn't really quite big enough for anybody who doesn't have a certain amount of litheness to be able to get through.
Right, Theron's very oddly built for his size.
Yeah.
And so that you can see. So, but on the other hand, Theron is probably one of the tallest people on this planet at the moment.
Yes.
Because he's 7 feet tall in a universe of short people, apparently.
Yep.
Everybody has low average height in this setting.
Yep.
I'm doubting more and more that this could have been done by somebody that we know. Seems like we have some sort of off-world operator. Let's go back to the office. I want to check and see if there's any heads up from the local transit about any customers come through the port in the last week or so.
So, you head back to the sheriff's office, which, again, in the style of all, kind of backwoods sheriff's office, is kind of a small little area with one, kind of small back room where Theron actually has his desk, and then basically a small hallway and a few other work areas up front, and then maybe, 3 or 4 chairs worth of seating, kind of waiting area, a hallway that leads to like the drunk tank, basically, and then a big double glass door that kind of leads in. When you come back, you see that one of the other deputies, a rather unusually well-built Quillian by the name of Quaddam, is waiting outside for you, which is basically never a good sign.
Your presence would suggest that there is a problem, Quaddam.
I'm sorry, sir, but the mayor is waiting for you?
That would probably suggest a problem, yes. Theron goes back to his office. I assume that's where the mayor, the honorable Lord Mayor is waiting.
Mm-hmm.
So the honorable Lord Mayor is a predominantly looks like an Ardori, but she actually happens to be an Ardori Qualian hybrid. Her mother, Quevelin, is Qualian. So all of her sort of bioillumination spots are sort of the same hue as Qualian skin, and when they glow, they're like glowy green. And she's a little bit smaller and slighter than most of the Ardori there. And her name is Iquus Thenquandra, so Mayor Thenquandra. And she's in, a very tidy business suit, but of more fingerole style, not really like the off-world Ardori. And she's been pacing a little bit back and forth in front of the sheriff's desk, and stops abruptly when Theron walks in and sort of clasps her hand together and takes a breath out and squares her shoulders. Sheriff, you're back.
You are correct, Mayor Thenquandra.
I assume that you have been investigating the recent theft that's occurred?
I have been doing just that. Your faculties of prediction have served you very well in this case.
I hope your faculties of prediction can serve you as well. I really need you to tell me that you're close to finding who did this and recovering the missing items.
I would only love to be able to tell you exactly what you need. However, that is not the thing that I have to tell you at this time. Theron has by now moved over to his desk, where he has a worn but relatively nice hover swivel chair, and he plops down in it, spins around in it once, puts his feet up on the desk. He has a manner towards the mayor that's a little bit... it's an odd combination of deference and the slightest sort of adolescent inclination to try and challenge. He's not used at this point in his life really to being somewhat co-equal with a woman in a position of power. That's a very strange thing for a relatively young male Ilaros. So he's constantly sort of vacillating between wanting to please her and wanting to see if he can make her challenge him. So he's intentionally not meeting her eyes while he's going through the terminal on his desk and trying to see, is there anybody that has come through the port recently that I have any warnings from, whatever the galactic equivalent of Interpol is.
So there's actually going to be 3 notices, which is definitely a little bit of an unusually high one. It's not clear at all the degree to which these are referring to separate individuals. But basically you have one that mentions that there was a mining vessel without an up-to-date registration that was docked here And it was docked here for only a day, basically, and didn't have anybody, I guess kind of engaged in anything that would suggest an actual reason to land on the planet. So that set up one red flag. And then there's two different notices that both came in basically for things kind of on the, be on the lookout in this sector kind of things. One for a notice that somebody had been moving counterfeit antiquities in the area, and that everybody should kind of be on the lookout for a dealer of those. And then also somebody who mentioned that it appeared that a local, galactically local narcotics operation was expanding its business into some kind of modified medical surplus type substances. And that there was a belief that they were working to kind of move those out into some of the nearby area, and that anyone in a place with a known drug underworld essentially should be aware that there could be a new interplanetary connection that was moving in.
So when Theron sits down, the mayor remains standing. So one of the few times that she gets to be a little bit taller than him. And she sort of places her hands on her desk and tries to look officious and displeased, which is difficult for her because she's generally very mildly intimidated by the giant Catman. Qualian blood runs deep. So, so she sort of tugs her jacket straight and kind of straightens the lapels. I need you to put your full efforts behind this investigation, Sheriff. It's imperative that this is resolved quickly and as quietly as possible.
I give every case my full efforts, Mayor. I would hope that my performance up to this point would have made that abundantly clear to you. Again, Theron has his feet up on the desk, but he's flexible enough that he now leans forward over his feet from in his chair. So he's sort of bringing his muzzle much closer to her than it was before.
And she kind of quivers with the effort of not, stepping back, but she holds her position and tries to, maintain eye contact and look,
This is great because on the one hand, it's clear how this could be intimidating from somebody of his size, but on the other hand, I could just see either of my cats actually doing this.
But then they very slowly nudge their mug off the desk.
He stares at her very intently and somewhat stoically. Sniffs a bit, his whiskers twitch. Something is making you uncomfortable about this particular crime in a way that seems disproportionate to what is ultimately a minor theft of some personal artifacts.
That is not relevant to this case.
Theron turns his head about 45 degrees to the side. That is exactly the opposite of what I would say. But my prior experience with you would suggest that you aren't going to tell me what the problem is. So, I will do my best to solve this case. Quickly.
Well, as usual, Sheriff, your blunt honesty is refreshing, if uncomfortable. So, I expect to hear good news from you shortly. And she kind of now has an excuse to step back, so she does, and nods to him and looks over at Blue and says, I hope you're still coming for cards on Thursday. And walks out of the office.
Oh man, small town fucking politics.
Someone is leaning on the mayor, Blue. Or at least she's afraid that someone is going to.
Yes. That's unusual for her. She doesn't tend to move for people a lot.
No, she mostly moves for herself. And then, with an economy of motion that I deeply respect.
Some truly commendable inertia.
It could just be 3 juniors, but I don't think so. He doesn't have actually that much pull with her. All right, we've got 3 bolos here. Well, 1 weird situation, 2 bolos, I suppose. I want to see if maybe there's something we can find about this medical smuggling operation.
At this point, this is where basically the Ron Howard style narrator would interrupt and say, although he doesn't say it, part of Theron's reason for being interested in pursuing this route first is that his favorite bakery, the Camp Medusa Food Service, is right nearby the place where his preferred lead for such issues is most frequently found.
So I take it we're going to the bakery.
You are an astute judge of character, Blue.
It is my job.
All right, jump cut to the bakery.
Okay. Jump cut to the bakery where a literally the fattest Quailian that probably anyone has ever seen, wearing what appears to be 3 different aprons at the same time, comes out of the kitchen with a meat pie that's about maybe 2 feet wide.
That's right.
And places it down in front of Theron.
Theron, he just looks gleeful. he's just happy. And this is like, he's got this great job. There's this awesome Quailian woman who makes him meat pies all the time.
Right after his giant boat of noodles.
He's absolutely like, you know, if there was a sunbeam coming through the window right onto him right now, he couldn't be any happier. Ms. Quamanda, as always, I am indebted to you. He sticks his muzzle just right into the pie, like just down, just bits of gravy and flecks of meat just flying out. It's getting all in his fur. He's just chewing away for a good 20 seconds. Then he sort of looks up over the pie, across the table at his informant, and says, "What do you have for me, Drianne?"
So, as he's eating, by the way, Quamanda will kind of lean in and kind of scritch him between the ears. And I would wager that she's probably literally the only person alive who could do this and remain so. So she's kind of scritches Theron a little bit and then kind of like walks back and goes back into the kitchen.
Well, Theron, says Drianne, who I guess I'll describe briefly. He's got the lower half of a snake, like a large, scaly, like heavily scaled snake. He's got the torso of a very lean humanoid, and he's got a dragony head. And he wears outdated musical group t-shirts. Well, you know, business has been pretty good. Thanks to you and to Blue White. Is Blue White here?
Yes.
Okay. Well, by the way, I have a little favor to ask of you. I seem to have misplaced a couple of containers of ionized argon. They're missing. They're missing in the old boathouse on the lake. No hurry.
No, of course.
I just thought it was something that you would be interested in, Blue White.
I have no idea what you're talking about, but I'll certainly take a look at it.
Yes. Well, I assume that my charming company is not the only reason you have invited me to this establishment.
You assume correctly. Also, I told you I wanted you to meet me at the pie place that I like so much, so I could get some information from you about a crime.
Oh yes, crime. I mean, what is crime, really?
Crime is when people take things that aren't theirs. We've discussed this before.
Normally I frown on the sheriff's intense literalness, but that is accurate.
It is my understanding that there has been some motion in the circles that you move in, and by the circles that you move in, I mean the illicit drug trade, away from the production of narcotics and towards the smuggling of certain medical devices, chemicals, what have you. Do you know anything about this? I am asking as both your friend and the sheriff, and also someone who could probably kill you very easily.
Drian blinks his nictitating membranes rapidly in annoyance. Well, I do happen to have some interesting friends. As a matter of fact, I have some cousins who are coming in from out of town. We just thought we'd have a picnic at Warehouse 41 tomorrow night. I would hate for our little get-together to have any interruptions.
Then why would you tell me about it?
Well, I know how concerned you are with
oh, no, I see you doing that thing again.
And
we've talked about this. Yeah, I understand now. Forgive me. I'm still working on this whole not saying what you mean thing. I understand. I'm supposed to know about the picnic so that I'll go there, and it's not actually going to be a picnic. They're probably not your cousins. I mean, okay, I'm on board.
Good. Well, speaking of issues of politeness, it is, I would consider, extremely rude for competing businesses to take up shop directly across the way. If there was another meat pie establishment across the street who was selling pies for less money with meat that was not as good, meat that was sentient? Do you? I've never managed to determine. Is that distasteful to you?
Theron sort of looks up. His mouth is now entirely out of the pie in order to... It would depend entirely on whether or not they were brave and capable on the field of battle, or if they were just some schmuck.
I see. Well, I can see you're not as good at this little tete-a-tete, this little witty repartee that I have enjoyed with your predecessors. So I will just how you say, cut to the chase. There was indeed a shipment from off-world of some fafical, some isonosophine, and vitrioline. And as you may or may not know, those are very key ingredients in crystal krypton, dragon's teeth, velociraptor. And as much as I know you could really use a good hit of dragon's teeth, I do not think it is, how you say, good business. I have a sneaking suspicion that I know the culprit who brought in these dirty goods.
Would you like to tell me their name so that I can arrest them?
I would. Are you sure you would not like some dragon's teeth?
Oh, I think that would be a terrible idea.
All right.
Would it be anything like what happened 3 months ago with the hyperdanzapine? Here, Theron is referencing an earlier situation in which there was a different problem with some dirty batch of narcotics and he resolved the problem by eating them. And while that should have been enough to kill several times over organic being of his mass, of course, he's not a normal organic being of his mass. So instead, it gave him a very unpleasant head cold, and he was quite perturbed about it for some time.
Oh, no, nothing like that. Imagine, if you can, the largest ball of yarn in the world.
Theron's tail begins to swish back and forth.
And it is your friend.
The yarn is my friend?
Just to whet the appetite. Anyway.
We'll have to discuss this more later.
Good.
After I've solved this case.
Then perhaps you should look into certain Nasira Zil.
I do not know that name. Do you have anything you can tell me about where this Nasira Zil might be?
That I do not know. I do know that this exchange was made for some exotic archaeological fragments of some variety. Those are not my stock in trade.
No, you mostly sell illegal narcotics. I understand that.
Anyway, I'm glad we had this little chat, as always.
I am too. I enjoy talking with you because it gives me opportunity to eat one of these pies.
Yes. Well, bonjour.
How up on, I don't know, I guess, like, points of interplanetary, like, criminal interest would Blue typically be?
Moderately. She does her homework.
Okay. In that case, then, she at least would probably recognize the name as somebody who's, infamous as a galactic thief, black market dealer, etc., etc. Like, it definitely kind of has that quality of, like, the Pig Panther's been through town.
Sheriff, I think we might have a significant outside player involved here.
As Blue is starting to talk, Theron has just stuck his head under the crust of the pie and is just getting in there, just getting all in there. He puts one finger up, sort of in Blue's direction, like, give me a minute here. I'm working on this pie. Spends a little while more, just slurping away at the gravy, chowing down on the meat. Breaks up through the crust like one of those icebreaker ships, like just like a submarine breaking through from underneath the ice. It's just, I can't express to you enough how disgusting it would be to watch Theron eat almost anything in person. He's like, so, outside operator, go on.
Blue takes a moment to generate a field of intense heat to clean the flecks of meat off of herself. This has happened several times over the course of the past 20 minutes. This Nasira Zil is a known criminal agent off-world in a few different places. And it seems like if someone has paid her to be here, that either someone has paid her to be here or whatever was in that box has some pretty extreme value to attract that kind of attention.
And she's on finger roll. That was a poor mistake on her part. All right. Let's find this Nasira Zil.
So, as Theron says that, just almost immediately after, you hear a sequence of rather unexpected sounds coming from somewhere in the back of the bakery. First, an incredibly loud retort, like, the shot of some kind of projectile-based weapon. Then what sounds like a tall, heavily, laden shelf of baking tools and materials and everything tipping over onto the floor, and then a door being basically almost torn off of its hinges in terms of being opened very aggressively.
Theron's ears perk up. He leaps over the table and runs on all fours into the back to see what happened. Okay.
You come into the back of the bakery and are quickly taken to a rather shocking scene. The first thing that you notice just is that the back door has been knocked open, basically torn off of its hinges, and sunlight streaming in through the thick haze of flour that there is in the room. As you kind of shake your head a little to kind of be able to see through that, you notice that this giant shelf has fallen right in front of you, and that whole bags of flour have broken open, and pots and pans are everywhere, and utensils and spatulas and everything. And at that point, you're able to look just past that, where you see a sight that will haunt you forever, which is the sight of an enormous pie crust, a little bit melty from the heat, draped over a form with one spot where what appears to be greenish-reddish blood is kind of leaking into it, and two Quailian feet sticking out from one side.
Theron gets a look of shock and dismay on his face. He lunges to the form covered in like a soft pie crust, like it's like a dough, right?
Yeah, like it's kind of draped over like a blanket.
Right. And sort of tears it away carefully, but it's not hard for him to tear things. Mm-hmm. Away from the area around where her head ought to be.
What he finds is that Quamanda appears to have been shot by some kind of projectile weapon at ultra close range, directly in the brainal region.
Okay, so she's gone.
She's gone. It looks like it was instant.
Theron throws his head back and just roars. It's, birds fly away, right? Like it is a very grating thing to hear. And then you said that there was a smashing noise of a door having been knocked loose. Is that... Yeah. It's like the back door is gone, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, having determined what has happened in here and having unleashed a mournful scream, Theron races to the back door to see if there's any trail or evidence or whatnot.
So there's no, much like...
He has his sword and his gun out at this point, by the way.
Much like you saw at the bank, there's almost nothing in the way of kind of visible or kind of physical trace evidence. And if you had come here maybe even 10 minutes later, you would have felt like the scene was entirely cold. But since you are here like almost instants after this, what you're able to pick up is just the faintest hint of a smell on the air, which basically smells like some kind of mixture of, if you had to describe it, it smells like a mixture of roses and dust.
Okay.
You're able to pretty quickly grasp that it is likely the smell of a morget of some kind, and two, that it doesn't really smell like anyone specific that you've ever met before.
Okay, so basically, I get a scent that says morget, not a familiar morget.
Yep.
Okay.
And it's really fresh, so although it's very faint, it does seem like you could probably kind of try to follow it.
Okay, so I'm racing as fast as possible in the moving in a way that could be described as frantic because of the speed and intensity of it, but because it's Theron is still extremely precise and controlled.
What does Blue do when Theron gets like this?
She tries to keep up while at the same time calling using some of her internal facilities in the glass sphere, calling in the various emergency services that need to deal with that situation. But in terms of Theron, she just tries to keep an eye on him and keep out of his way, but also keep him from doing too much collateral damage.
Okay.
So if Theron can, if Blue is in fact successfully keeping up enough that Theron knows that Blue is there, Theron's going to say, a strange Morgott has murdered Quamanda.
That appears to be the case.
For a moment, Theron has a realization about why other people are perturbed when he says things like that. So, trying to follow the scent.
Okay. It leads out the back door. He's able to pretty quickly identify that this seems like a more or less an optimal compromise position between trying to move unpredictably and kind of zigzag with moving it at the fastest possible total speed towards the destination. In one sense, it's kind of almost easier for him to follow because it's so close to the path that he would take if the positions were reversed, which is why he's able to pretty quickly determine that this path is almost certainly heading towards the out-of-town spaceport.
The murderer is trying to get away. They're trying to get off-world. Send a message ahead to the spaceport. Nothing out.
Yes, sir. I do that.
Okay. So, it's not necessarily obvious the mechanism, used for this, but it's far enough away that, most people would probably have to take a vehicle. I don't know if for Theron that would still be a case where he would just kind of move under his own power or not.
I think his maximum land speed, given everything about Theron, is probably competitive with the speed of any ground transport that's available on Finger Roll. At least, within this, if he was going out in the countryside, it would make sense for him to switch to a vehicle. But in city, it's just as fast for him to run.
Right, especially because then he'd actually have to get something. So, okay. So,
right.
All right, so then you're just basically booking it across town down the, kind of dusty roads and everything to the out-of-town spaceport, which is probably, about maybe 2 miles or so outside of, the outside borders of, what you would think of as town, and kind of has this Wild West, rocket launch pad kind of thing going on. There's a lot of little wooden buildings around a set of large, basically stone pads with various kind of weird tubey machines and everything that are used to kind of fuel and interact with ships that have come and gone and everything.
Mm-hmm.
When you arrive, you are basically in time to see the following, right? So there is a vessel, pretty nondescript kind of commuter, small scale ship of the type that comes here a lot for people who are hoping to vacation, essentially. That is on one of the pads. Its VTOL engines kind of powering up, all of its, everything disconnected. There are 2 local, emergency response vehicles that have arrived, both of which appear to be covered by some kind of unusual, white bio-netting that seems like it's the result of some kind of weird gadgety thing that's basically held, locked them both into place with everybody still inside, kind of trying desperately to bang their doors open to no avail. The boss of the local spaceport, a finger roller by the name of Savain, who is currently hanging from one of the kind of nearby weather towers about 30 feet up, one leg tied to a cable which had been kind of slung over and then attached at the base of the tower. So he's just kind of swaying pathetically in the air without any real purchase or ability to to move anywhere effective. And then standing on top of the ship, you see the figure of Nasir Azil. So a form that you can judge with reasonable certainty underneath is Morgan of some kind, but basically covered head to toe in these kind of loosely but meticulously wrapped silks, leaving basically just enough space for the fingers of her paws, a thin, hole for her eyes, and a spot for her tail. And at the time that you spot her, they are almost like lily white. But as soon as she looks down and notices that you're arriving, they shift to like a dark, like maybe 80% of the way to black. So she's standing on top of the ship, and she's basically holding in her two paws two different kind of like loosely knit canvas bags almost, each with something inside them. In one of them, there's what looks to be some kind of weird greenish goldish cube, which kind of emits a faint light. Not like anything in particular you've seen, but also not like really super distinct.
Okay.
And then in the other one, kind of a larger bag, there are what look to be 3 or 4. Well, you know what? Actually, that one, it's probably a little harder to see these. You can tell there's things that maybe look like cylinders, kind of. Maybe about a foot tall, about twice as tall as they are around. And that bag is kind of, she kind of shifts a little, and you hear the sound like you'd get when you have like several rocks together in like a bag or something.
Okay.
So she's kind of looking down at you.
Oh, I mean, Theron hasn't cut speed. He's not upon his prey yet. So,
yep.
He runs. If she makes a motion that suggests that she's training a weapon on him, he'll run a little bit more evasively, but otherwise he's just running flat out at her, and as soon as he feels like he can make the leap, he'll jump and try to pounce on her. I guess he'll get within plasma blaster range first, so that's probably the first thing that'll happen if he gets close enough to shoot at her.
Okay. Okay, so he's just he's taking a shot?
Yes. Once he's in range, he'll take a shot. Yes.
Okay, and so just to be clear, so is his kind of like strategy here? Is this like kind of trying to be a single precise shot, or is this just like Rambo unloading, or like somewhere in between?
The plasma pistol is something like a pump action shotgun in terms of the way one would use it in a conflict, right? It is not terribly long range. It's a little bit forgiving in terms of aim. It makes a very serious impact if it does connect, and it can fire multiple shots, but it's not like a machine gun or something. Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a concrete effort for each shot. It's not
Yes.
semi-auto or anything. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So, Theron comes running in. And so he has his sword in the other hand, and he's shooting with the one.
Yeah. So he's running at her. As soon as he feels like he is close enough to take a shot, he will bring up his arm. He's not going to cut speed, though, in order to steady himself for the shot. He'll just take it, and he'll probably have enough space and time to get one of those off before he's just close enough to leap on her.
Okay. So he takes the initial shot. He can see that there's probably like a split second of kind of thought and consideration on her side in terms of strategy here. And what she winds up doing is basically tossing the one larger bag like into the air, and in one kind of smooth motion basically pulling something out from like somewhere in the vicinity of the back of her head, when it comes out, you can see it's almost like some combination between like an enormous needle and like a tiny thin stiletto. There's kind of like a very slight kind of handle with a very small kind of like pommel dot at one end, and then this very thin blade, maybe about a foot wide, that comes out from that. She kind of slides 1 foot back to kind of, take this martial stance. Theron's visual acuity is enough to even be able to see that, like, she makes the slightest squeezing motion with her hand, and the blade basically kind of lights up a bright blue, and just before like the plasma shot would kind of get immediately onto her, she kind of flicks it through the air in such a way that it kind of leaves behind almost kind of a brief force field like surface that the plasma beam kind of hits and kind of essence scatters across. And then within like about 1.5 seconds to 2 seconds, basically the thing that she left there fades. But she's still holding her little stiletto thing. She's tossed the bag pretty far up into the sky. So at this point, it's still kind of moving upwards. She probably tossed it like, the equivalent of like 15, 20 feet, something like that, to kind of give herself enough time to do what she's doing right here, basically.
Okay. So Theron got off his one shot. She has a means of dealing with it. His plasma pistol is basically state issue. He considers it a useful tool, but he's always sort of disappointed if he can solve a problem with it before he gets to solve a problem with his sword. So, once that initial exchange is resolved, I'm going to assume that he's by then close enough to make the leap. So he will try to pounce on her, midair, holster the plasma pistol so that he can use both hands to wield the sword over his head. He is definitely aiming to cut her in half.
Okay. So basically, about when he's, getting in towards the spot where he's going to have to jump, the engines have powered up enough that the ship starts lifting off. So, he's got to kind of adjust his kind of like the exact stance and like force from his legs here a little bit to adjust for this. So, instead of jumping onto this stationary object, he's now jumping, probably 20 feet higher than he was originally planning onto a ship that's moving at a not inconsiderate rate of speed, like kind of up from the ground, with loud, bright, roaring engines lifting it upwards. So with that, it's enough for her to kind of slide back to the back. Theron basically can land towards the front of the ship. The whole ship is probably like 30 feet long. So he can't quite reach to the spot where she was, given the change of momentum that's involved in that. So he kind of clatters to the front of it. She's standing at the back. As he's kind of coming in, I guess this would be about when, especially since the ship's moving upwards now, the bag would have kind of come back down. So she's basically going to reach up one kind of foot to catch it, and kind of in one motion kind of swing up, catch it, and drop it, behind her. She holds out the stiletto kind of horizontally in front of her, other hand like held back, again, being kind of a reactive martial mode. And she kind of looks out at you. At first, she's just paused completely still.
Theron. So, I want to make sure I have this pictured right. Is the ship long and thin, like we only have a horizontal approach with each other, or is it more of like a flat expanse where we have some room to maneuver?
There's a little room to maneuver. It's probably like, maybe 8 feet wide and maybe 30 feet long.
Okay, so Theron is going to start to move towards her, but in an arc, right? So like he's circling, but the circling is also an approach.
Yep. I can like literally see the like anime speed lines on this. Like I'm not sure what show I'm thinking of where I've seen this, but I've seen it.
You murdered Quamanda. She will never make pies again. She will never scritch me behind the ears again. I won't even bother to eat you after I kill you.
I won't even bother.
I will dig a hole and put your body in it, and let the worms eat you instead. This is the absolute height of contempt in the culture of the Aeloroi, to be buried and
rather
not
than
eaten. Yes.
Okay. So, and like, what's the like, the nature of the attack, basically? Like, what does this look like?
Yeah, so he's circling, he's got his sword out, right? Both hands on the pommel, drawing in on her. As soon as he feels like he's close enough to press the assault, he will dash forward and try to cut in at her, whatever the opposite shoulder of the hand that she's holding the stiletto in is, and down. So a nice diagonal cut across the torso. So
you go in like that. So I'm going to say at this point, this is kind of the start of like what basically winds up being this pretty kinetic, close quarters. Definitely like, I mean, what we basically have is like, you know, furry wushu here. So like, I guess that's really ultimately what we're talking about, right? There's a cat guy and a chinchilla lady, one of whom's like basically a samurai, one of whom's basically a ninja, and you're fighting in close quarters with bladed weapons on top of a spaceship. So that's just what's happening. We're all okay with that.
You know, Tom and Jerry.
Yeah. So,
right.
You know, and I'm imagining that basically on her side, the way this is going to kind of play out is that you're going to take a swing at her, and her primary means of defense at this close quarters is going to be these kind of like very swift, I guess I want to say like kind of jagged motions, in the sense that like she's trained herself to be able to make movements from like a still position that are very sudden and show very little obvious acceleration. So most of her defensive strategy is built around dodging and zigging and zagging in ways that are not necessarily immediately obvious. Paired with like occasionally using her arm and the stiletto for leverage to kind of slide the blade a little bit out of the way. Meanwhile, she is basically each time that she gets a chance attempting to make little kind of surgical stabs in Theron's direction. Specifically, you know, it's clear very quickly that almost everything she's doing is either kind of a disabling or crippling stab. You know, it's like going for tendons, limbs, potentially like neck or back, if like that is the area that kind of exposes itself. But it's clear that she is kind of interested first and foremost in anything that will like most directly like eliminate the active threat in that sense, rather than going for a killing blow or anything. So, you know, there's kind of a little bit of a dance back and forth on this. And it becomes very quickly obvious that, you know, she is effective with all four of her limbs. So there's a lot of kind of like flipping upside down and like tossing her blade between a hand and a foot to like swing from an unexpected direction and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of going back and forth here. I want to check at this point, what is Blue doing? Because I know she can hover, so like she's got some options, but
yeah, she she was barely keeping up with Theron, mostly because she doesn't have to worry about footing. And once the ship started moving, she's like barely able to sort of approach them. So she's probably just catching up.
Okay. Okay. So you're once she gets the chance to like act, is she going to try to do anything with the ship? Is she going to try to do anything with the emergency vehicles are with Sylvain or anything?
Actually, she'll probably try to circle around to the cockpit and see if she can force them to land.
Okay.
Well, she is a featureless sphere. She does have, like, you know how if you're in, like, a cheap gift store, they have those glass blocks with the, like, images inside of them that are essentially made of, like, tiny bubbles?
Mm-hmm.
That's how her badge is displayed. So, like, she can swing around to the front of the ship and, like, focus some light on it, and it will become visible, which will hopefully be a clear message to the pilot.
Okay. Okay, so you're doing that. While this fight is kind of going on, up top, like, up until now, Nasira has been, like, completely, silent. At a certain point, after kind of dodging one particularly, like, effortful swing from Theron, she kind of stops and slides back, into the kind of, like, defensive stance again, looks at him again, and goes, "This isn't what you think it is." Her eyes dart very briefly to one side and back. You probably want to get off the ship soon. Otherwise, she's just standing there, blade still out.
I do. Once I have killed you. Theron makes another lunging attack. Given how angry he is, everything that their fighting styles are like exactly opposite, right? Everything that he does is dramatic, and every blow he takes is a killing blow. Obviously, they're not connecting, but that's...
Yeah, so, like, literally about as opposite as possible here.
Yes.
But opposite in such a way that, like, you get this kind of interplay back and forth from it. She kind of, at one point she kind of ducks, slips under, kind of, like, scurries, around, Theron's leg in the course of, avoiding one blow. And she says, "Your anger is misplaced." Kind of slips over. At this point, the ship is getting reasonably high up in the sky, and it kind of looks like she's maybe kind of made a decision almost at some level. So she kind of like you can see basically just from, like, her fur and the few spots where it kind of, like, is visible, like, it kind of fluffs out and in a way that kind of suggests that she's taken this, like, very large kind of decisive breath, right? She's kind of like, takes the hand that's still holding the other bag, the one with the cube, and kind of slings it back over her shoulder, blade out, and she just kind of tilts her head at you a little bit.
Okay, I'm maybe I'm not getting the blocking here. So she's got both bags?
No, the other bag is behind her, kind of, sitting. The bag with the cylinders is kind of sitting on the surface of the ship, behind her a little bit. She's still holding the bag with the cube, and she's in one hand, and then she's got the blade out with the other. And she's gone from kind of active maneuvering again to back again into kind of a stopped reactive position, as if she's kind of waiting for this next thing that you're going to do.
So Theron will continue his circling sort of motion. He's made enough lunges at this point that he recognizes that he can't just keep making an all-out attack every time. I have already charged you with the murder of Commander. Do you deny the charges or not?
She kind of pauses, and she goes, "I deny them."
Theron scrunches up his face in a look of obvious contempt. Can you provide an alibi for roughly 2 minutes ago?
She pauses. There's a slight delay before she responds. And she says, "No, all I can provide is this." And she kind of reaches back with one foot, grabs one side of, like, one of the kind of edges of the what do you call it? Like the lip of the bag, like she grabs one of the edges of the opening of this bag and kind of pulls in such a way that the contents are revealed. And so what you see, first with your, earthly sight is that there's a set of 5 jars, and looking at these now, they're what, you would recognize basically as kind of canopic jars, right? They're made of a kind of like a dark black, like rock of some kind, with patterns of kind of like all right angles interlaid into it in very fine detail of this like bright, reflective silver. They kind of range in size from maybe the shortest one is like maybe 6 inches tall to one that's like maybe, 2 feet. And they're each a slightly different size. And on the surface of each one, kind of sketched out in this silver light, is a geometric design that like very clearly, and it's different for each one, but on each one of them, it kind of sketches out the shape of something like an insect.
Oh.
Theron recognizes these, doesn't he?
Yes, and almost immediately after he recognizes them, his vision is just like, his mental vision is like just overcome by this like involuntary like memory reflex. And what he experiences basically is kind of 2 simultaneous viewpoints. One from a position in the sky, basically seeing this huge kind of like chitinous insect creature like laid out on this table, all of its different limbs secured by different kind of like metallic bands of different metals, each of which you can see at the point that it ends has like the little head of a snake. And at the same time, also the viewpoint of that creature itself looking up towards the ceiling, where there are 2 big glowing red eyes almost in a field of blackness. And then almost like the rapid fire, like horrifying, like David Fincher movie montage type experience of basically a fast forwarding over it as this creature is kind of vivisected alive, different strange insectile organs pulled out and layered one by one into jars just like the ones you're looking at. And seeing this again from above as the surgery is carried out at the same time that you're experiencing it, like being done to you as you kind of, inhabit the body of this creature. And this is all, it takes like almost just a second for this to happen. But in that moment, you're distracted, and that's basically enough for one of the secondary, kind of wing flaps on the ship to open up right underneath where Theron is standing and flip him off the ship.
Okay. Yeah.
So...
All right, so Theron goes flying off into the upper atmosphere, basically. At this point.
You're able to see her kind of look down at you as you're falling. She takes a moment to kind of watch before turning her back, and then the ship disappearing, moving in such a way that she disappears over the horizon at the top of it.
Okay. My assumption is that I'm just going to depend on Emporos to allow me to crash safely here. Is that
absent somebody else doing something, or you having something really cute? That's probably what would have to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, Theron watches Nasir Azil watch him. His eyes narrow, and then he falls back to the surface of Fingerroll, and there's an explosion as he lands because he's falling from very high up, and there's a significant crater that's left behind, and then he crawls up out of it very pissed off.
Note that the shape of the crater, of course, lines up closely with the creature that we just saw in that flashback. Like, they're basically...
Yes, right. The crater is not his shape. The crater is the shape of the insect.
And so there's these big, so for Blue, certainly there's this kind of weird experience of seeing this crater with all of these kind of long insectile limbs kind of coming out of it from each side. It's like obviously weird, right? Like, you know, there's no reason that anything like this would happen unless something weird happened. Especially given the fact that Theron is then going to climb out and seem basically unharmed from falling this like incredibly great distance.
Yeah, Blue is going to zip down there at top speed, which is going to be too late for anything other than greeting a very irritated sheriff as he walks away. Are you all right?
You mean physically? Yes. Nasir Azil is a Morgat, isn't she?
Yes?
Open a charging document. Nasir Azil charged for the crime of killing Amanda, the pie maker. Put it out everywhere.
On it, sir.
He is, if anything, more taciturn than he usually is.
That is quite impressive. Okay. I think that's it, unless somebody has something really pressing to cover there.
Oh, I've got a brief, like, in that last moment, that Drian is on the top of the whatever support thing that Sylvain was on, having helped his buddy, the spaceport boss, get safely out of trouble, and then looks down at the bug-shaped crater, rubs his nictitating membranes, and holds up a little empty vial and tosses it over his shoulder. The end.
Okay.
A couple of days later, when Theron goes into his office, he will find sitting on his desk just a large wooden spoon that is heavily stained and smells strongly of meat.
And about, I'd say probably a couple days after the spoon resurfaces, and I'm guessing at this point, you know, no one knows exactly what happened, but everyone knows Amanda is dead, and, you know, nobody's been arrested for it, and obviously this flyer is going around everywhere, and so, you know, people are sort of talking, and a scandal has broken. It turns out that the mayor had a plot of land which thorough investigation discovered was actually a site of Silsey ruins that she had been trying to turn into an amusement park without putting any of this to a vote.
Oh, those callbacks. So good.
Yes.
So good.
That's it this week for the Chimera. If you're feeling moved by the holiday spirit, you don't have to buy us anything. Just give us the gift of advertising. Tell your friends, or share some links, or stop by Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or whatever your preferred podcast streaming service thing is, and leave us a rating and a review. And you can also find us online on Twitter at ChimeraPod, or on Facebook at ChimeraPod, or at thechimera.space, which is our web central place thing, and our Tumblr. Or you can email us directly at itsthechimera@gmail.com. And join us back here in 2 weeks for another episode of Fresh Mayhem. Thanks for listening.
There aren't a lot of things that are shaped like a crab ragoon. It's ragoon shaped.